Today, we're going to talk about something that can be, well, pretty terrifying. It's that feeling, that sensation that no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to catch your breath. So let's really dig in and figure out what that's all about.
Have you ever had that? That tightness in your chest, that feeling of almost being hungry for air? Maybe you're just suddenly uncomfortably aware of every single breath you take. If any of that rings a bell, I want you to know you are definitely not alone. And just understanding what's going on is a huge first step.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off by defining this breathless feeling. Then, we'll play detective and look at the usual suspects, your lungs and your heart. After that, we'll dive into some causes that are a little more beyond the obvious. And we'll wrap up with how doctors actually get to the bottom of it all.
Okay, section 1, that breathless feeling. So first things first, what are we really talking about here? What does shortness of breath actually mean when it becomes a chronic thing?
So the fancy medical term is chronic dyspnea. Let's break that down. Chronic is simple. It just means it's been hanging around for more than a month. Dyspnea, well, that's the key part. It's when that feeling of being out of breath is way, way bigger than what you're actually doing. You know, like walking up one flight of stairs and feeling like you just sprinted a 10K. That right there is a signal from your body, and it's one we need to pay attention to. And here's a really important thing to get. This feeling is totally subjective. It is your personal experience. For you, it might feel like a band tightening around your chest. For someone else, it could be this desperate, gasping need for more air. And you know, that's part of what makes it so tough to pin down, because it feels different for everyone. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty. When you're having trouble breathing, where's the first place your mind goes? Yep, your lungs. So let's start there. Okay, so there's a whole lineup of lung conditions that could be the bad guy here. You've got the ones we've all heard of, right? Like asthma and COPD. But then there are other things, like interstitial lung disease. And that's basically when the very tissue of your lungs gets stiff and scarred, making it harder to breathe.
This is where your doctor really puts on their detective hat. They're looking for clues, you see? For example, if you've got a history of smoking and you're wheezing, that points a big finger at COPD. Think of COPD as trying to breathe out through a tiny little straw. It's tough. Or say you have a fever and a nasty cough. Well, that sounds a lot like pneumonia. And each of these clues leads them to specific tests. They might have you do something called spirometry, which is actually pretty simple. You just breathe into a tube to see how well your lungs are working. Or they'll get a chest x-ray to see what's physically going on in there.
Okay, so what if the lungs check out? Well, the next prime suspect is their partner in crime, the heart. I mean, think about it. Your heart and lungs are this incredible dynamic duo. Their whole job is to get oxygen everywhere it needs to go in your body. If one's struggling, the other's going to feel it.
So if your heart isn't pumping blood like it should, you can get this traffic jam, basically. Fluid can start to back up into the lungs, and boom, you feel breathless. That's the classic story of congestive heart failure. But it's not just that. It could also be a sign of issues with the arteries of your heart, or even something like an arrhythmia, which is just a term for an irregular heartbeat. And here we go again with the detective work. Your doctor will ask about other clues. Are your legs and ankles swollen? Do you find it really hard to breathe when you're lying flat? Those are textbook signs of heart failure. Or maybe you felt your heart fluttering or even fainted. That could point to an arrhythmia. To figure it out, they'll use tools like an ECG to check the heart's rhythm or an echocardiogram, which is basically an ultrasound for your heart, to get a really good look at how it's pumping. So, we've looked at the big two, the heart and the lungs. But what if the problem isn't even in your chest? Yeah, that's right. Let's dive into some of the less obvious but just as important reasons for feeling this way.
See, it's so important to realize that shortness of breath isn't always about one single organ failing. Sometimes it's a whole body issue. And other times, it's all about that incredibly powerful connection between what's going on in our head and how our body physically responds. Let's talk about anxiety, because this is a big one. And no, it is not all in your head. When your brain senses danger, and that danger could be a car speeding towards you or just a really stressful deadline, it flips a switch, the fight or flight switch. Your heart pounds and your breathing gets fast and shallow to pump oxygen to your muscles. But here's the crazy part. The result is that you can feel like you're suffocating, like you can't get enough air, when in reality you're actually breathing too much. It's a very real, very physical response, and it can be absolutely terrifying.
And speaking of terrifying, what about waking up in the middle of the night just gasping for air? It's the stuff of nightmares, right? Feeling like you're choking or can't breathe. This is a really specific symptom, and we need to talk about it.
So what on earth could be causing something so scary? Well, a big one is obstructive sleep apnea. That's where your airway actually closes up for a moment while you sleep. But it could also be something like severe acid reflux that's creeping up and irritating your throat, or even a panic attack that hits you while you're sleeping. Heck, even something as simple as postnasal drip could be the culprit.
And believe it or not, the list keeps going. We've got things like anemia. Think about it. If you don't have enough red blood cells to carry oxygen around, it's like trying to run a delivery service with half the trucks you need. Your body has to work overtime and you feel winded. Then there's deconditioning, which is really just a sciencey way of saying out of shape. When your fitness level drops, even simple things can feel like a huge effort. And something like obesity can also play a role because extra weight can literally press on your chest and limit how much your lungs can fill with air.
Okay, wow, that's a lot of possibilities, right? So the big question is, how do you actually figure out what's going on? And maybe even more important, when is it time to get seriously concerned? Well, let's start with some good news, okay? The vast majority of the time, we're talking about 85% of cases, the cause is one of those usual suspects we already talked about. Things like asthma, heart failure, COPD, or even anxiety. What that means is that for most people, there is a clear answer that doctors can find, and then they can start to treat it.
So when you go to the doctor, they're not just going to guess. They have a standard toolkit to start with. They'll likely do a chest x-ray to get a picture of your heart and lungs, an ECG to check your heart's rhythm, that simple spirometry breathing test we mentioned to see how your lungs are doing, and some basic blood work to rule out things like anemia.
Okay, everybody, listen up, because this is probably the most important part of our entire discussion. Some symptoms mean it's an emergency. I'm talking stop what you're doing and call 911 serious. If your shortness of breath hits you suddenly and feels severe, or if it comes with chest pain, fainting, or if you notice your lips or nails turning bluish, do not wait. That could be a sign of something life-threatening, like a heart attack or a blood clot.
Now, on the other hand, there are symptoms that aren't quite a 911 emergency, but they are absolutely a make a doctor's appointment situation. If you're feeling breathless and you notice your feet are swelling up, or if you just can't breathe when you lie down flat, or if you have a fever or you're wheezing, these are all signs that you need to get checked out. Don't just brush them off.
So when you really think about it, that constant feeling of being short of breath, it isn't just a random feeling. It's a signal. It's a message your body is sending you, telling you that something, somewhere is off balance. So the question is, are you ready to listen?